The Arizona Territory burned beneath a ruthless afternoon sun, heat rising in shimmering waves from the sand and stone. Daniel Mercer rode slowly along the ridge trail, his hat pulled low, a wagon of supplies creaking behind him. The desert was quiet in a way that made a man uneasy, too still, too watchful. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the gunshots cracked through the silence. Daniel pulled his horse to a halt, every sense sharpening. He urged the animal forward just enough to peer over the ridge. Below, near a dry creek bed littered with pale stones and thornbrush, 3 mounted bandits circled a lone woman. Her hands were bound in front of her, but her back was straight and her chin lifted in defiance. The men laughed crudely, their rifles resting easy across their saddles as if they were deciding which cruelty to enjoy first. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He had seen lawlessness before, the territory bred it like weeds. But something about the way she stood, unbroken, unbowed, stirred something steady and immovable inside him. He slid his rifle free from its scabbard and steadied it against a rock. He was a rancher, not a hero. But he was also a man who knew there were lines that should never be crossed. His first shot rang clean and true. One of the bandits jerked backward and fell from his saddle before he could even cry out. Chaos erupted. The remaining 2 scrambled for cover, firing wildly toward the ridge. Bullets kicked up dust near Daniel's boots, but he had already shifted position. He moved downhill with calm precision, firing only when he had a clear shot. Years of hunting in these hills had taught him patience. Within minutes, the gunfire stopped. The desert fell silent again, as if swallowing the violence whole. Daniel approached cautiously. The woman turned toward him, dark eyes sharp and guarded. Her long black hair tangled in the wind, and despite the ropes cutting into her wrists, she looked more furious than frightened. He dismounted and cut her bonds. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I was never safe," she replied evenly. "And you have changed more than you understand." Her voice carried strength, not gratitude. She studied him as though measuring his worth. "I am a pony of the Apache," she said. "Those men claimed I belonged to them." Daniel glanced at the bodies cooling in the sand and felt a chill despite the heat. In this territory, men twisted laws into weapons. By stepping in, he had not just saved her, he had stepped into something larger, something binding. The wind began to rise, lifting dust into the air like a warning. And Daniel realized that whatever trouble those bandits had started, it was far from over. Dark clouds rolled low over the desert as Daniel and a pony reached the ranch, the air thick with the promise of a storm. Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the distant hills, echoing across the wide, empty land. Daniel helped her down from the horse, careful not to touch her longer than necessary. She landed lightly on her feet, scanning the ranch house, the barn, the fences, as though committing every detail to memory. "It is quiet," she observed. "It usually is," Daniel replied. "That's how I like it." Inside, the house smelled faintly of leather and wood smoke. It was simple, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a narrow bed in the adjoining room. Daniel poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She accepted it without thanks, but not without dignity either. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "I'll ride to town in the morning. I'll speak with the sheriff and settle this." A pony's gaze hardened slightly. "The sheriff will not settle it. He will weigh it. And I will be what is placed on the scale." Daniel had no easy answer for that. Morning came with hard light and harder news. Before Daniel could saddle his horse, Sheriff Wilkes rode up in a cloud of dust. His expression told Daniel everything before he even spoke. "You've stirred a hornet's nest, Mercer," Wilkes said, dismounting slowly. "Cutter filed claim papers on that Apache woman. Said she was bound for work at the Silver Creek mines under territorial labor agreement. She was tied up like stolen cattle," Daniel shot back. "That's no agreement." Wilkes sighed. "Doesn't matter how it looked. By law, when you killed those men and removed her from custody, you assumed responsibility. Territorial code says to prevent blood feud or property dispute, guardianship must be formalized. Daniel felt the weight of the word settle in his chest. Formalized how? The sheriff met his eyes. Marriage. Silence stretched between them. When Daniel told Apache, she did not flinch. She stood near the doorway, sunlight framing her silhouette. In your law, she said slowly, a woman becomes protection for a man's mistake. It's not like that, Daniel replied. It would be on paper. Only to keep them from taking you back. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. And after the paper? You'd stay here, he answered honestly. Safe. Until you choose otherwise. A long moment passed. In my tribe, marriage is chosen, she said. But I see no choice here. 2 days later, beneath a sky heavy with wind, they stood before Sheriff Wilkes and signed their names into a ledger that smelled of ink and dust. No vows were spoken. No rings exchanged. Just the scratch of a pen sealing their fate. As they rode back toward the ranch side by side, the storm finally broke behind them. And though the rain washed the desert clean, neither of them felt untouched by what had just begun. Marriage on paper changed little at first, yet it changed everything. The ranch house felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were aware that two strangers now shared its space under a bond neither had freely chosen. Daniel kept to his routines, rising before dawn to tend the cattle, mend fence lines, and check water troughs. Apache rose just as early, though he never heard her move. He would step outside and find her already standing on the porch, eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting riders to crest the hills at any moment. They spoke when necessary. Nothing more. Daniel gave her the larger share of the house, insisting he would sleep near the stove. She did not argue, but she did not thank him either. Gratitude, he realized, was not something she gave lightly. One afternoon, he found her in the barn examining a saddle with a torn strap. Without asking, she sat on an overturned crate and began repairing it with careful, practiced hands. Her fingers moved quickly, weaving leather with the kind of skill that came from years of experience. You've done ranch work before, Daniel said, leaning against a post. My father traded horses with settlers, she replied without looking up. I learned what I needed. By the end of the week, she was riding alongside him during cattle checks. She handled the horse with effortless grace, guiding it across rocky ground as if she and the animal shared one mind. Daniel found himself watching her more than the herd, impressed despite himself. But beyond the fences, resentment simmered. Word of their marriage had spread through town like wildfire. Some settlers muttered that Daniel had betrayed his own kind. Others whispered that the marriage was a sham meant to hide something worse. Cutter's remaining men were said to be gathering north of the river. The trouble arrived just after midnight. Daniel woke to the smell of smoke. He rushed outside to find flames licking across the far edge of his grazing field. Shadows of riders flickered against the firelight before disappearing into the dark. Apache was already mounted, bow slung across her back. They test your fear, she said calmly. They won't stop, Daniel answered, grabbing his rifle. Then we do not wait for them to return. Together they tracked the raiders through narrow ravines and over hard-packed earth. Where Daniel saw dust, Apache saw direction. She read broken twigs, displaced stones, faint impressions in the soil. By dawn, they cornered the men at a rocky pass. Daniel fired warning shots, steady and deliberate. Apache circled wide, cutting off escape. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the bandits fled, leaving behind their bravado. As silence settled once more, Daniel looked at her differently. This was no reluctant bride bound by law. She had fought beside him, not because she had to, but because she chose to defend what now sheltered her. And for the first time, the ranch felt less like a divided house, and more like a shared one. Spring arrived quietly, softening the hard edges of the desert. Patches of green pushed through the dry earth, and the cattle roamed farther without fear. The smoke from the burned field had long since faded, and Cutter's gang had not returned. Word spread that they had moved north, chased off by resistance they hadn't expected. The ranch stood stronger than before, fences repaired, watch kept carefully, and an unspoken partnership settled between the two people who now called it home. Inside the house, the silence had changed. It was no longer heavy or strained. Daniel found himself lingering at the table after supper while Aponi spoke of her childhood, of wide tribal lands, of her mother's songs carried on evening wind, of ceremonies beneath endless stars. He listened not out of obligation, but genuine interest. In turn, he told her of his parents, of how fever had taken them within the same winter, leaving him alone with cattle too wild and land too large for one grieving young man. He had built the ranch from stubbornness more than hope. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in amber and rose, they stood side by side on the porch. The desert stretched before them, peaceful and vast. Aponi rested her arms on the railing, watching a pair of hawks glide overhead. "In my tribe," she said softly, "marriage becomes real when two hearts step into it willingly. Not when they are pushed." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "And what do you feel now?" She turned to him, her dark eyes steady but no longer guarded. "When you rescued me, I believed you would claim ownership like the others tried. But you never did. You gave me space. You fought beside me, not ahead of me." A warm breeze moved between them, carrying the scent of new grass. "I stayed because I had no choice," she continued. "But I remained because I wished to." The word settled deeply within him. "I never wanted a wife forced by law," Daniel admitted. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as an obligation." He reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers curled around his, firm and certain. This time there was no sheriff, no ink, no statute binding them. Only the quiet understanding that what had begun in gunfire and necessity had grown into something neither law nor fear could command. Under the open sky, their marriage ceased to be an arrangement. It became a promise, chosen freely, rooted in respect, and strengthened by everything they had endured together.